I now call Kelvin of Anderson JC to conclude the case and summarize for the proposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we have heard a lot about the emphasis on the environment. We have heard a lot about how pollution has caused the problems of today in Singapore. We have heard about how the proposition and the opposition has argued whether there is a cause for raising the price of usage charges and lowering the cost of ownership charges. Now, I'd like to sum up the opposition's case in 3 simple words. Firstly, self-centered. Secondly, contradictory. And thirdly, Newton's first law of motion, inertia itself. Now, moving on to my first point, what is it that the opposition considered in themselves? Now, the delivery companies considered that it is their profits who will suffer as a result of this policy. They believe that as a result of the increase in cost, they will suffer losses as a result. Ladies and gentlemen, we know today that delivery companies are also the cause of pollution itself, and they should be the ones who pay the social cost of polluting the environment. Ladies and gentlemen, today is not the day where we give the priority for delivery companies to enjoy special prices or cheaper prices so that their businesses can do well. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not depend on the delivery companies themselves for the economy. We need to do what is best for the consumers as a whole. The delivery companies may suffer losses, but they are doing it. But in the start, when they're gaining profits, they are doing it at the cost of society. And this cost of society must be placed upon them in order for the society to benefit, in order for the society to not take into account the environmental damage and pollution, as my colleague has spoken before. Now, secondly, the case raised by the opposition is also self-contradictory. They said that the consumers will think only about the cost of driving a car compared to those of cost of owning a car. They believe that $50,000 of owning a car compared to $2 of ERP will not discourage these people from using the cars. Now, from my research, I have concluded that there are many other From my research, I've concluded that there are many other forms of like the increase in ERPs that have led to the decrease in car usage on the roads. And all this information has shown that it will lead to a decrease in the cars and congestion on the road. Yes, sir.
So basically what you said earlier is that in a recessionary climate like today, you're going to let companies go under?
Sir, we are not going to let companies go under. This policy does not concern only about the economy. This policy concerns about the environment. We have many other policies that solve... No, ma'am. We have many policies that solve the economic situation, and I know that the Ministry of Finance is working hard to find a solution for the current economic crisis. But ladies and gentlemen, today the debate is not about the economy. Today the debate is not about whether the delivery companies are going to make... No, sir. It's not about whether the delivery companies are going to make a profit or not. It's about the whole society. If you're going to let the environment suffer, well, everyone will make profits. But what about the long run? If when we grow up, the children will never see the trees on the road. We'll never see the clean and fresh greenery that we see. No, man, that we see today. And do we want that to happen in future, ladies and gentlemen? I urge you not to go down that path. Ladies and gentlemen, protect our environment is important to us. And therefore, stop this irrational behavior of the opposition. Now, moving on to my third point. The opposition believes that the Ministry of Finance cannot find an optimal price. They believe that the Ministry of Finance cannot set a correct price for the ERP charges. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is inertia itself. They believe that we cannot do anything. They believe that we cannot set a right price for ERP. But I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the government, no sir, the government itself sets a price due to using estimates. And setting estimates will help them to get the best of what they can, to get as close to the optimal output as possible. And this assumption is not static. The government changes their ERP every few years so as to accommodate for the increasing population as well as the increasing ownership of cars. Ladies and gentlemen, today the motion itself only concentrates on moving a proportion of changing the blame of damage of environment to those who use the cars more. And that is mentioned by Ministry of Finance that people who use the roads more should pay more, and those who do not use the roads more should pay the lesser amount. That's why there's a lower vehicle ownership charges and higher vehicle usage charges. So in all, I've proven on 3 points that the opposition is self-centered, the opposition's case is self-centered, contradictory, and it proves inertia. So go with the proposition.
Thank you, Kelvin. I now call on Stephanie from the opposition to round up the case.
Ladies and gentlemen, with a total land area that stands at 682.7 square kilometers and a comparative size that is barely 3 times larger than Washington, D.C., to say that Singapore is physically tiny is indeed an understatement. At the same time, with our country's widespread affluence, it is likely that Singaporeans will continue to want to own vehicles due to factors such as flexibility and social status. Increasingly, car ownership is being viewed as a necessity of middle and upper middle income lifestyle rather than a luxury. The proportion of people with aspirations to own cars is also likely to grow over time as education level rises and people start to benchmark their lifestyle options against global standards. Coupled with our exceedingly high population density and limited land availability, vehicle usage is and will continue to be one of our foremost concerns. Today's invigorating debate has brought forth many fresh and varied points regarding how exactly the government should go about regulating the number of vehicles on our roads. In sum, I would say that the proposition's argument hinges upon a few rather sketchy points. Firstly, the claim that the pay-as-you-use system is a more equitable form of charging as it is a sharper and more precise instrument as compared to the blunt tool of high ownership charges, and that such a system will allow more Singaporeans to own cars while keeping congestion at acceptable levels. Secondly, the environmentalists have asserted that such a system will greatly deter vehicle owners from using their vehicles except when absolutely necessary to do so, hence reducing pollution. Thirdly, the public transport companies seated here today assert that our existing system is strong enough and ready to facilitate an influx of commuters. Yet, as we would like to point out, the Straits Times reported on the 15th of December 2008 with an ERP survey result. Only 2% of private vehicle owners are willing to make this change to public transport.
Point man.
Later, thank you. Thus, we remain highly concerned with the proposed system's overall effectiveness. It is of utmost importance for all of us, proposition or opposition, to remember that all policy crafted with regards to this matter should address as many negative externalities as possible. However, the usage charge-based approach that the proposition is suggesting today tends to favor redistributing traffic as a solution, rather than reducing the absolute number of vehicles on the road. Yes, sir?
What is wrong with redistributing traffic as long as it manages to keep congestion on expressways and arterial roads during peak hours to a bare minimum?
For instance, it will contradict the environmentalist points that these vehicles will be pushed off the roads, therefore reducing pollution. You see, sir, while we do admit that usage charge can help in regulating traffic, we don't quite know how the proposition can make its stance non-contradictory. While this might help to ease the major problem of congestion, it does little to minimize other effects such as pollution, as I have just mentioned. At most, usage charges represent a stopgap and short-term measure to dealing with the underlying and long-term issue of pollution. Yes?
Well, if you're stuck in the jam, you contribute so much more pollution to the environment versus when you're spread out and you're actually travelling on the road.
Well, ma'am, I would like to point out that if we control this at an ownership level and you do not own a car, then you would not be in that jam and you would not be contributing to pollution. On the other hand, if you lower ownership charges, as you have so mentioned, and everyone owns a car, and everyone is on the road, and everyone is stuck in congestion, then we won't be contributing more to pollution and congestion. So, the normal purpose of purchasing a vehicle is to use it, as everyone has emphasized time and time again. While usage charges might redistribute, or I do concede, somewhat reduce the number of vehicles on the road, the extent of success is not enough to render the method cost-effective or practical. Furthermore, we deal with this problem whereby buyers who perhaps cannot really afford to purchase a car end up being lured into doing so due to the misleading nature of lowered upfront costs. No, sir. The result could be numerous unused cars and a wastage of scarce resources, which could have been better poured into expanding infrastructure and public transport. We also cannot understand how having more vehicles on the road will reduce congestion or allow our school children to wake up later. School starts around peak hours, as I would like to re-emphasize, and most families wake up earlier to avoid ERP. Perhaps we could also note that a usage-based approach with regard to controlling the amount of cars on the roads is not as equitable as proponents of the House's motion might suggest. This especially affects the lower end of potential car owners, the middle class. You see, such a system is only fair in the event that income distribution is equal and whereby everyone can afford to pay the usage charges and it does not constitute a large proportion of their income. No, thank you, sir. and therefore people will only have the liberty to choose whether or not they want to use the roads if they can afford to pay. However, as we see in today's society, there's a very wide range of incomes, and therefore, no thank you, ma'am. And therefore, it is obviously of less consequence to someone from the high income bracket as compared to someone from the low income bracket to make that choice of whether they want to drive or not. The roads could be potentially, no thank you, sir. The roads could potentially be overly dominated by the very well off, posing a prominent social issue. A third adverse effect, as mentioned by our private and logistics transport companies, would be that operational costs for businesses would increase. This would result in longer travel time and decreased efficiency, and the long-run usage charges outweigh the nominal reductions, as they have mentioned earlier. At the same time, passing on these costs to consumers is rather unthinkable and rather undesirable. While we maintain that the current proposed system has some flaws, we do recognize the significance of usage charges as a form of vehicle control and believe that the motion could be improved with the incorporation of several suggestions. Perhaps usage charges could be implemented with this notion of variable taxation, that is, depending on the type of vehicle you drive or the capacity of your vehicle's engine, that is how we could do charging. We would like to emphasize that this transition from ownership-based charging to usage-based charging is one of the greatest obstacles to our success, and therefore we would like to encourage the proposition to focus on expanding infrastructure, public transport services, and slowing vehicle growth. I trust that all of us here want the best for Singapore, and since we do not want to hear that bell anymore, I just want to say that I hope when we come to debate next year, we won't have to pay $4 in ERP charges.
All right, so our judges will now leave the room and deliberate on who's the winner.
Thank you very much to all the teams that were involved in today's debate, and I'm glad that all of you really embrace the roles that you had here. You got all the mileage that you could have gotten out of the argumentation that your roles offered, and I think that really made the debate very, very interesting as a result. What we liked was the fact that because of the fact that you were very aware of your various positions and who you represented, we did have many perspectives coming into this debate. I'm glad that this was a debate about road pricing that talked about environmental concerns, that talked about the characteristics and usage behavior of Singaporeans and how all these things interacted, and that was a good thing. The thing that we wanted the debaters, to remember is also the role that you have within the debate, right, and the positions that you occupy, and the need to remember that you're not just there to deliver the various points that you have, but you're also there specifically to point out the problems that the teams that preceded you, that the teams are facing you, would have had within your argumentation. At times, there was a little bit too much concern on trying to get your points across without having the sort of engagement that was necessary to make sure that this thing was being done, right? So as more and more points are being brought on board this debate, you have to engage them instead of just letting them slide, right? However, we like the fact that there was a lot of passion. We like the fact that there was a great deal of energy and commitment to this debate. We just wanted to find which team had the best understanding of how the characteristics of road pricing would have an impact on the specific circumstances in Singapore, how Singaporeans might react, and how ultimately, when you weigh up the balances between environmental concerns, the need to protect the rights of ownership and property, as well as the need to keep Singapore's economy going, and which team basically made the best links carried the round in today's debate. It was very close, it wasn't unanimous, but ultimately we came to a decision which will now be announced by the chair.
All right, and it is with great pleasure that I announce the winner of this debate is the first team on our proposition, Hwa Chong Institution. Congratulations.